What's going on, everybody? It's me, Brandon, back again with another episode of What Am I Playing? And what we're playing today is the long-awaited Resident Evil 4 Remake. I can't believe I'm actually saying those words, and I can't believe the game has been out and I've been able to experience this entire remake. I gotta say, I had high hopes, but very low expectations. Resident Evil 3 Remake, it was cool, looks nice, but they cut a lot of content, and I was really looking forward to seeing what they did with Resident Evil 3, especially with how good Resident Evil 2 Remake was. I'd argue that Resident Evil 2 Remake is arguably the best Resident Evil up until this point. But with Resident Evil 4 being my favorite game of all time, my absolute favorite game. It is in my top 10 all the time, as you will soon hear in my video. But Resident Evil 4 is the king, my favorite game. It's the game that got me into Resident Evil and became a lifelong die-hard fan of this series. I've played these Resident Evil games countless times now. Ever since I first played Resident Evil 4, I've played Resident Evil 4 so many times, and for my favorite game to get a remake, the game I've played so much and understand like the back of my hand, and to see a fresh coat of paint and a new style of game for Resident Evil 4, it has me very excited but optimistic. So as always, let me know in the comments down below what games you are currently playing, and let's get into Resident Evil 4 Remake. When I've had discussions of what my top 10 favorite games of all time are, it's always changing. However, these days, my list seems to be sticking to the same 10, but shuffled in a different order. The game may stay the same, but the number one spot never changes, and that game is 2005's Resident Evil 4. I don't know where to begin with RE4. I've played almost every iteration of this game, purchased this game more times than I can keep track of, and I can't stop loving this game. When Capcom released this phenomenal Resident Evil 2 remake in 2019, I was in awe of how great this game was. Out of the original trilogy, 2 always stood out because of the setting, characters, and story. Having that classic title fully remade and ushering in a new way to play this masterpiece of a game that it is, I started to buy the idea of Resident Evil 4 being dethroned as king and 2 Remake taking that crown. Over the last couple of years, we've had a Resident Evil 3 remake which started strong but ultimately felt like a downgrade to the prior remake being RE2. There was cut content, a short campaign, and a lack of a true passion for a remake like 2 was before it. When Resident Evil 4 was rumored to be remade, I was hesitant. Did RE4 need to be remade? The graphics, the gameplay, and the story all hold up and still play and look great to this day. While I'm happy to discuss what this remake has in store, is it a proper remake? Did Capcom deliver the best version of a genre-defining classic? Let's get into the review. The story of Resident Evil 4 follows Leon S. Kennedy, a survivor of the Raccoon City incident in 1998. Leon was going into his first day as a police officer for the Raccoon City Police Department when the world went to hell. After surviving the events of Raccoon City, Leon was hired as a government agent and served under the President of the United States. The President's daughter, Ashley, has been kidnapped, and the President has sent Leon to investigate a rural village in Europe and bring his daughter back home. The events of Resident Evil 4 are very similar to the original counterpart. RE4 is best explained as a remake that trims the fat of the overall experience. Everything you know and love about Resident Evil 4 2005 is here, and they don't let a minute go to waste honoring the game that came before it. RE4 Remake does more than one thing, which is perfect for a remake. Still, my favorite part about it is how Capcom fleshed out more of the characters, world, and motivations. Thanks to this remake, it was awesome to see characters like Luis, Krauser, and Ashley become more of their own and have a richer history. The same thing can be said about the villains in the game as well. The enemies, their locations, everything feels lived in, where the original game felt like set pieces. This game and the remake, everything feels lived in and everything feels like it's there for a reason, and I really love that about this remake. The presentation of Resident Evil 4 continues to be given the beautiful RE Engine treatment. Everything we know and love is back and rendered beautifully within Capcom's flagship engine. From Leon's bomber jacket to the small details within the puzzles and walls of the castle, Resident Evil 4 hasn't looked better. I've even noticed the faithfulness in trying to recapture Ashley's scream just like in the original game. It's crazy. The first time I met the merchant felt like I had walked through time and met him for the first time again. He sounds the same, which is something I love. Seeing the new models of these characters I've grown to love over the years, and even being more excited to see what Capcom would do to the villagers, cultists, mini-bosses, and main bosses, I was never disappointed. After playing it for years, the biggest issue I've had in RE4 was that I wanted the experience to be more horror focused, and they did that wonderfully. One of my favorite encounters in this game is what they did to the Garrador, the Wolverine-esque dude. I was amazed. Originally when I went against him, I thought they were pretty scary, but now that I've done it and played it in the remake, it's done so much better. I felt genuine fear in my first encounter. It was brilliant. The River Monster, El Gigante, Salazar's Assassins, and more all live up to the hype of an RE4 remake, especially those fun creatures on the last island. Listen, I've seen a regenerator so many times at this point, but the remake had me shuddering just like my first encounter to get the F out of there and run. Well done, Capcom. Well done. Walking through the three main locations of Resident Evil 4, the village, castle, and island all have their own takes on the gameplay formula of Resident Evil 4 and expect you to use what you learned on your journey through the game up until that point. RE4 Classic had tank controls, meaning Leon could walk and aim, but he could not move once he was aiming. In RE4 Remake, he can move around freely, even while aiming. Most of the improvements for this game are minimal, but pack a huge punch in how you can play RE4 now. The combat knife can parry almost every attack in the game, lending its use to be an essential tool throughout your mission to save the president's daughter. First and foremost, I noticed that all these newly added features are quality of life improvements that make the game feel similar to the original experience, but allow new and old players a modern take on the classic perspective and controls from RE4 2005. Simply put, Capcom changes and adds only what is necessary without diverging too far off from the main gameplay beats of the classic Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 Remake made me skeptical once I heard they planned to tackle it as a remake. I already thought the game was a masterpiece, but now as I look back on the experience of RE4 Remake, I can't help but adore every moment I've spent with it. As I said earlier, it feels like they did the greatest hits of Resident Evil 4, added some newer updates and adjusted the tone to the overall experience, which I love. But what's been nice about these modern remakes is that they take new ideas and spin them into their games while leaving some of the original titles with unique content. Meaning if you've missed something that wasn't in the remake, you still have the classic game to play and enjoy. Resident Evil 4 Remake trimmed down the fat of the original game. It gave the player a 10 to 15 hour experience of a solid, lean story of Leon's rescue mission, while also expanding on some of the lore within the original game. Resident Evil 4 Remake will become another solid entry in the remake genre, and one of the shining examples of a phenomenal remake experience. As we now close the book on the main 4 games being remade, I'm very excited for the future. I hope they do a remake of Resident Evil 5 and 6, but first we need a Code Veronica remake. I also would not be mad if we got a Resident Evil 1 remake in the style of the modern games. I think that would be something that would be truly incredible. But with Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6, those are the most interesting for me. Those are somewhat modern games. Resident Evil 5 is a great co-op game and one of the best co-op games, but it needs more horror. And Resident Evil 6 just needs to be fully remade from the ground up, from story to whatever's going on in Resident Evil 6, because that game is nuts. But anyway, Resident Evil 4 is a shining example of what a remake is and sets another milestone and footnote on what a good remake can be. And that's it for this episode today. I really hope you enjoyed it. Resident Evil 4 Remake is here and it delivers on all fronts. It's really hard for me to say a remake is better than the original, and a lot of times with movies, it's just not the case. But Resident Evil 4 Remake has something so special, and I think the developers understood what a big deal this is. It's not just a remake to service fans. It's a remake, but also a game that did change the industry. Resident Evil 4 changed the way we looked at third-person shooters, horror games, action games. Resident Evil 4 adopted that over-the-camera perspective and influenced many games such as Dead Space and a bunch of other titles as well. And Resident Evil 4 still stays as king on my list, and even the remake, I may say, topples the original game. Now, the best part about Resident Evil 4 Remake is that there's some content still in Resident Evil 4 Classic that I can go ahead and experience and still be unique to that game. The laser room, there was that one villain in the cargo bay that's chasing you, and then there's a bunch of other set pieces as well. But Resident Evil 4 Remake tones down and trims everything, as I've said in the review, and it just gives you the perfect cut of Resident Evil 4 in my opinion. They also add some new things and up the horror elements in the game, which I think is much needed, as that was my biggest request for this remake. But I gotta say, Capcom delivered, and Resident Evil 4 is a masterpiece of a remake. So please let me know in the comments down below what you think about Resident Evil 4 Remake. Is this your favorite Resident Evil remake to date? What is your favorite Resident Evil character? And are you excited for the future of Resident Evil? As always, my name is Brandon, and I will see you all next time.